Hello, everyone. Welcome to the history of the camera. This is going to go over the major points in history of the camera. We are going to start with the pinhole camera, which the first evidence of that is 4th century BC. Um, Aristotle wrote about the pinhole images in the 4th century BC in his famous books are references to pinhole observations. There is some evidence of earlier um, pinhole notation. 5th century BC, Chinese scholars had discovered that light travels in straight lines. The philosopher Mo Tai recorded the formation of an inverted image with a pinhole. In the 10th century AD, Arabian physicist and mathematician Alazan described a pinhole's usefulness for viewing a solar eclipse without the risk to the eyes. Okay, today there are still types of pinhole cameras, and you can actually build your own pinhole camera. There is photographic paper that you can use with a homemade pinhole camera. I don't think we're going to have time to make one, but if you're ever interested in it, you can always Google it or look it up on YouTube. There's all kinds of references online and how to's online on how to build a pinhole camera. Next, we're going to talk about camera obscura. The camera obscura was a light-proof box with a pinhole and then later lenses on one side and a translucent screen on the other. This screen was used for tracing by the artists of the inverted image transmitted through the pinhole. The artist Vermeer is believed to have used this to sketch his paintings before he worked on them. Daguerreotype camera from the 1800s. This is the process of capturing photographic images that would not fade away. It was introduced by Daguerre, and that's why it became known as daguerreotype. It was a process that printed the pictures onto tin using chemicals to make it permanent. This is one of the daguerreotype cameras that was used during that time. Then came the dry plate camera. Um, Dry plate is a glass plate coated with a gelatin emulsion of silver bromide. It can be stored until exposure, and after exposure, can be brought back to the darkroom for development at leisure. This had great advantages over the daguerreotype, which had to be developed immediately. Um, the dry plate, which could be factory produced, was introduced in 1871 by R.L. Maddox. It was superseded by celluloid film, that's film in a little container, early in the 20th century. Here is an example of a dry plate camera. We then have the box cameras. The box camera, which actually came out in the late 1800s and was popular through about 1950 or so. The box camera, with the exception of the pinhole camera, is a camera in its simplest form with a simple lens and shutter that is factory filled with film. Um, some of these had minor adjustments that could be made to shutters or apertures, but most of them were fixed focused and did not have any flash capabilities, so they had to be used out in bright sunlight. 35 millimeter camera, which came in the early 1900s. It is a box camera that uses film negatives to capture photographs after they have been exposed. This is a more modern one. This is a fairly old one. And these are negatives. When a camera uses film, it places the image on a negative, and a negative is just the image in reverse. It's backwards, and the colors are opposite. So if there is black on the picture, then in the negative it's white. If there's white on the picture, in the negative it looks black. And then pictures are used are printed from these negatives using um, some kind of chemical process. Now, the thing about negatives is you can always keep these negatives, and these negatives can be used over and over again to make more prints of your picture and keep the quality of the picture without. A lot of times, if we just scan a picture and make copies of a picture that way, we lose the quality of the picture. Polaroid or instant camera came out in 1948, the first one. The instant camera is a type of camera with self-developing film. You push the button, the picture pops out, and it takes several minutes for it to dry and for the picture to develop. Polaroid actually went into bankruptcy, and another company bought them and started creating their own take on the instant camera. So we still have instant cameras now. Um, the Fuji Instamax or something like that. It's called. Um, we still have today. The pictures are smaller coming out of those than they used to be. These pictures also are not the best quality, but they're very convenient if you want it right away. There's an old instant camera. This is similar to the ones from when I was growing up. This one was probably about 1960s. And then there's one from today. Okay, Instamatic cameras. These are not the same thing as instant cameras. Instamatic cameras are small, easy to use point and shoot cameras. They use a film cartridge that must be developed. Cartridges come in two sizes, 110 and 126. Each cartridge takes 12 or 24 pictures. This camera right here is just like my first camera when I was young. My grandmother gave it to me. It was a hand me down from her. And the only way you could have a flash is to put this little bulb in here. And you could only take one picture with this bulb. Once it flashed, it was no longer any good. And you had to replace it with the next bulb. They called them flash peanuts. Um, that moved on to these squares here, which once it flashed, it would turn to the next flash bulb. You had 4 flashes on this, and then you would have to throw it away and get another one. And then there were some that had flash towers. I think they had up to 16 flashes before you had to replace it. My Instamatic that looked like this was only capable of using black and white film. Um, so my earliest pictures I took when I was young were all black and white. It did, of course, other Instamatic cameras could take colors, and these two right here would use the 126 size of film cartridges. Now, when they made the camera smaller, these back here are small, skinny cartridges. These are the 126 cartridges that were made for the pocket size ones. They made them smaller so you could slip the camera in your pocket. Then came the disposable or single use camera. It's a simple box camera sold with a roll of film installed, and it's meant to be only used once. In the 90s, late 80s, and 90s, the people like to put these on their guest tables at weddings, and guests would take pictures with them and then leave the camera behind so the bride and groom could develop them and have a whole boatload of pictures from their wedding. People also like to take these on vacation. So if you lose a camera, it could be a big deal. But if you lose a single use camera, although you don't want to lose those pictures, it's better than losing a camera. These also came in waterproof varieties that people could take into pools. Um, but they were single use. You would take it and you would have it developed and you would get the pictures back, but the camera was gone. And then the digital camera actually started in 1975. The first one, it took something like 28 seconds to actually take the picture. It was not ever sold. It cost like $20,000 to make. Um, Digital cameras did not become really popular until the 90s, mid to late 90s. And the ones like we use now, the DSLRs, where you can change the lenses and have full uh, control over the different settings, they did not become available to most people until the very late 90s into the early 2000s, because that's when the price came down enough that people could actually start to afford them. Uh, what had happened with the digital camera is they took out the compartment for the film and the winding mechanism that wound the film, and they replaced that with sensors, electronic sensors, so that the images could be recorded digitally. These are just some different types. This was one of the very first ones. They had to actually carry this thing on a with a shoulder strap hung over it. I think this camera cost something like, I think it was like $15,000, something like that. This is looking more like today's camera. Okay, cell phones, which most of us use now. The first cell phone camera could only take pictures with less than a megapixel. Right today, today's cell phones take pictures at 16 megapixels, and they can record video at 120 frames per second. The first camera phone, like I said, it was under a megapixel, and the video I think was something like, I'm thinking like 12 frames per second, so it was very jerky. Um, Steve Jobs and his introducing the iPhone is was the start to the modern camera phone. Nowadays, your front and your rear cameras have high quality pictures that it takes. It takes very good video. Um, Most cell phones have the same quality. Um, like I said, the iPhone, Samsung, Google, the Google phone, they all record at 120 frames per second. They all have pictures at 16 megapixels. They all have settings that can make your pictures look professional. It's just whether or not you know how to use the phone. So that's the end of our little lesson on the history of the camera. Um, Use this as a foundation as you're working through the module for the history of photography. I am wanting the whole module, the history of photography, to be the foundation that we build on for our knowledge of using a camera and our knowledge of photography and your growth in becoming a photographer. So, with that being said, let's get started on our first module.